Okay, so you want to own an oil refinery. You picture something vast and industrial, towers of steel breathing fire into the night sky, tanker trucks lined up at the gate, a business that turns the most valuable commodity on earth into gasoline and simply prints money on the spread. Crude oil goes in one end, cash comes out the other. Here's the problem. A refinery does not actually care whether oil costs $50 a barrel or $90. That number, the one that dominates the news, is almost irrelevant to whether the business you're picturing makes or loses money in a given quarter. A refinery is not really an oil company. It is a factory with exactly one input and half a dozen outputs. And the only number that determines whether it survives is the gap between what it pays for that input and what it can sell the outputs for. A gap that can evaporate to nothing or explode to record highs without crude oil's own price moving at all. Once you understand that distinction, everything else about this business, why almost nobody has built a new one in 50 years, why a single mislabeled pipe fitting can end 150 years of operating history in a single morning, and why the government itself can quietly become one of the largest line items on the expense sheet, starts to make sense. Let's start with what you're actually buying into, because refineries are not interchangeable. The most basic distinction in this industry is complexity, formally measured by something called the Nelson Complexity Index, a score that reflects how much of a barrel of crude a refinery can convert into higher value products versus how much it's stuck selling as cheap, low-margin residual fuel. A simple topping refinery does little more than distill crude into its basic fractions: gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and heavy residual, and is largely at the mercy of whatever mix nature gave it. A complex refinery adds cracking units, catalytic crackers and hydrocrackers that break heavy, low-value hydrocarbon chains into lighter, high-value ones, and coking units that squeeze even more gasoline and diesel out of the sludge at the bottom of the barrel that a simple refinery would otherwise have to dump onto the market for a fraction of the price. The difference between a simple refinery and a complex one isn't a matter of taste. It's the difference between selling a barrel of crude's worth of output at commodity prices and selling that same barrel's worth of output as premium transportation fuel, and it's why the most complex refineries in the world can run profitably on crude grades other refiners can't touch, buying cheaper, heavier, more sour barrels that a simple refinery would lose money processing. Above the individual refinery sits the ownership structure. Integrated majors, the Exxons and Chevrons of the world, own the crude production, the refining, and often the retail stations, insulating themselves somewhat from swings in any single link of the chain because a bad quarter for crude prices can be offset by a good quarter for refining margins, and vice versa. Independent refiners, companies like Valero, Marathon, and PBF, own none of the upstream production and none of the retail stations in most cases. They buy crude on the open market and sell finished product on the open market, meaning every single dollar of their business is exposed directly to the spread between those two prices, with no upstream or downstream cushion to absorb the shock. And at the far end of the spectrum sit what the industry informally calls teapot refineries, small, often less complex operations, historically concentrated in China, that emerged specifically to exploit gaps in state quota systems, running on thin margins and minimal complexity, closer in spirit to a commodity trading operation than an integrated industrial company. Before you process a single barrel, you have to build the thing, and this is where the naive mental model collapses immediately. Building a new refinery from scratch in the United States today would run into the billions of dollars. And this isn't a hypothetical. It's the reason nobody has actually done it. No entirely new grassroots oil refinery has been built in the United States since 1976, a fact that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Every increase in American refining capacity since then has come from expanding and debottlenecking existing sites, not from breaking ground on new ones, because the combination of capital cost, permitting timelines that can run a decade or more through environmental review, and the political near impossibility of siting a new heavy industrial facility with hydrofluoric acid tanks and cracking towers next to any community in America has made greenfield construction functionally extinct. What this means for anyone thinking about entering this business is blunt. You are not building a refinery. You are buying one that already exists, in a market where the total number of sellers has been shrinking for decades, and where the regulatory barrier to a new competitor ever showing up is close to absolute. That scarcity is a genuine structural advantage for whoever already owns capacity. But it also means every acquisition happens at a premium, reflecting the fact that this is a closed club with no new members. Once you own the site, the geography of where it sits determines almost everything about its economics. Refineries cluster near either crude supply or product markets, and the ones that get both, the massive complexes along the U.S. Gulf Coast near Houston and Port Arthur, sit at the intersection of pipeline networks bringing in domestic crude, deep-water ports capable of receiving imported barrels, and direct access to the petrochemical and export infrastructure that lets them sell finished product into both the domestic market and overseas. A refinery stranded without direct pipeline or waterway access has to move crude in and product out by truck or rail, adding real transportation costs to every single barrel processed. A cost that shows up nowhere in the sticker price of the plant itself, but shapes every year of its operating life afterward. This geography also explains why refining capacity closes unevenly rather than randomly. When California and the U.S. West Coast in particular have seen a string of refinery closures and conversions in recent years, it isn't because West Coast demand for fuel collapsed. It's because those refineries operate under some of the strictest environmental and fuel specification requirements in the country, are geographically isolated from the pipeline networks that connect the rest of the country's refining system, and increasingly compete against a state policy environment actively designed to reduce petroleum fuel demand over time, a combination that makes marginal aging capacity in that specific region uneconomic well before it would be anywhere else. Now, here's the mechanism that actually explains how this business makes or loses money, and it's the single most important concept in the entire industry. It's called the crack spread. A refinery buys crude oil and sells a slate of finished products, mostly gasoline and diesel, and the refining industry's standard shorthand for measuring profitability is the 3-2-1 crack spread, an approximation of what a refinery earns by turning 3 barrels of crude oil into 2 barrels of gasoline and 1 barrel of diesel. The math is simple. Take the revenue from 2 barrels of gasoline and 1 barrel of diesel, subtract the cost of the 3 barrels of crude that produce them, and divide by 3 to get a rough gross margin per barrel. What matters here isn't the absolute level of crude prices at all. A refiner processing crude at $90 a barrel and selling gasoline and diesel at prices that reflect that $90 input is in exactly the same economic position as a refiner processing $40 crude and selling into a market that reflects $40 crude, provided the spread between input and output stays the same. What actually threatens or rewards a refinery is a mismatch between the two, crude prices rising faster than product prices can follow, or product markets tightening due to a supply disruption while crude stays flat. Over a normal year between 2015 and 2021, the 3-2-1 crack spread averaged somewhere in the range of $12 to $18 a barrel. In June of 2022, following a wave of global refinery closures and a demand rebound that outran the industry's ability to rebuild capacity, that same spread spiked to roughly $60 a barrel, an extraordinary blowout that had far less to do with what crude oil cost than with the simple fact that the world temporarily didn't have enough refining capacity left to meet demand, a scarcity the industry itself had helped create through years of closures. For an independent refiner processing a few 100,000 barrels a day, a $5 per barrel swing in the crack spread translates into tens of millions of dollars a day in gross margin one direction or the other. This is the number that actually decides whether a given quarter is spectacular or catastrophic, and it moves largely independent of the oil price headlines running on the news. There's a hidden cost buried inside this business that almost nobody outside the industry has ever heard of, and it has quietly become one of the largest line items many independent refiners face after the cost of crude itself. Under the federal renewable fuel standard, refiners are required to blend a government-mandated volume of renewable fuel, mostly corn ethanol, into the gasoline and diesel they sell. Refiners capable of blending ethanol directly into their own fuel at the refinery gate can satisfy this obligation with the physical product. But ethanol is corrosive and cannot travel through most pipelines once blended, so it has to be blended downstream, typically at a terminal, which means any refiner without its own terminal and blending infrastructure has no way to physically satisfy the mandate at all. Instead, Those refiners have to buy tradable credits called Renewable Identification Numbers, or RINs, on the open market, essentially paying someone else to prove that the blending happened on their behalf. This turned into a genuinely enormous cost for independent, non-integrated refiners specifically, the exact companies without their own retail terminal networks. PBF Energy spent close to $350 million on RIN credits in a single year in the mid-2000s, and spent another $283 million in just the first quarter of 2021 alone, as RIN prices spiked from around 10 cents at the start of 2020 to nearly $2 within 18 months. CVR Refining, a smaller independent operator, disclosed that it had spent more than $670 million on RIN credits since the program began, calling the requirement, in the company's own words, an egregious tax on independent merchant refiners. This is money that has nothing to do with the cost of crude, nothing to do with the crack spread, and everything to do with a regulatory design that happens to fall disproportionately on exactly the kind of company most likely to be running on thin margins in the first place. And it can appear or disappear from the balance sheet based on a credit market that trades more like a speculative commodity than a genuine compliance cost. To understand what happens when all of this collides at once, in one plant, on one morning, you don't need a theoretical model. You need Philadelphia Energy Solutions. The refinery on the banks of the Schuylkill River had been operating in some form since 1866, the oldest continuously operating refinery on the East Coast, processing around 335,000 barrels of crude a day and directly employing more than 1,000 people, most of them represented by the United Steelworkers. The plant had already emerged from a previous bankruptcy in 2018, 1 year before everything ended. In the early hours of June 21, 2019, a section of 8-inch pipe in the refinery's alkylation unit, a pipe originally installed 46 years earlier under a previous owner, ruptured, releasing a mixture of flammable hydrocarbons and hydrofluoric acid that formed a vapor cloud and exploded. The largest of the resulting blasts, formally classified as a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, hurled a piece of processing equipment roughly the size of a school bus more than 2,000 feet across the river. Remarkably, no one was killed, though the incident released more than 5,000 pounds of hydrofluoric acid, a chemical whose worst-case release scenario, according to the refinery's own filings, could have threatened over 1 million people in the surrounding region. Within days, the company announced the plant would shut down permanently, and a month later, Philadelphia Energy Solutions filed for its second Chapter 11 bankruptcy in as many years. The Federal Chemical Safety Board's investigation ultimately traced the failure to that single decades-old elbow of pipe, which had corroded far below the thickness at which it should have been replaced, and the company later sued the original equipment manufacturer, alleging the pipe had been mislabeled with the wrong material specification from the moment it was installed in the 1970s. The site, 1,300 acres of industrial land 3 miles from downtown Philadelphia, was sold out of bankruptcy for $225.5 million to a redevelopment firm that demolished the refining units entirely. 150 years of continuous refining history, larger than downtown Philadelphia itself in physical footprint, ended because a single pipe fitting installed under a previous owner in the 1970s finally gave out, and every fixed obligation the company carried, the debt, the workforce, the maintenance backlog, was still there the moment the explosion happened. The EPA later reached what it called the largest settlement it had ever sought under a federal chemical safety rule, $4.2 million, a figure that tells you almost nothing about the actual scale of what was lost that morning. Every refinery, disaster aside, also has to plan for a cost that arrives on a predictable schedule and still manages to blow up budgets anyway. Turnarounds, the periodic full shutdown of a processing unit for inspection, maintenance, and replacement of worn equipment, happen every 3 to 5 years per major unit and can take a plant offline for 4 to 8 weeks at a stretch. A major turnaround on a large processing unit can cost tens of millions of dollars in direct labor, materials, and contractor fees, and every single day of that shutdown is a day the plant is paying its full fixed cost structure, insurance, debt service, a skeleton staff, while generating zero throughput revenue from the units under maintenance. Skip or delay a turnaround to save cash in a lean year, and you're gambling with exactly the kind of aging, corroded infrastructure that ended Philadelphia's run in a single morning. Let's put a mid-size independent refinery's annual economics together using figures consistent with the industry. Say the plant processes 200,000 barrels a day and, in a strong year, captures a 3-to-1 crack spread averaging around $18 a barrel, translating to roughly $3.6 million a day in gross refining margin, or about $1.3 billion across the year. Subtract cash operating costs, energy, labor, catalyst, and routine maintenance, typically running $4 to $8 a barrel, call it $6, which is another $438 million a year, leaving a net operating margin before capital costs of roughly $860 million. Now subtract RIN compliance costs for a non-integrated independent without its own blending terminals, which in a volatile year could run anywhere from $100 to $300 million, depending on where credit prices land. Call it $180 million. Subtract this year's share of turnaround and sustaining capital spending, another $150 million, on a plant this size in a normal cycle. That leaves roughly $530 million in operating cash flow before debt service, a genuinely strong year. Now the bad year. The crack spread compresses from $18 to $8 a barrel, which happens routinely and happened dramatically in 2020, when collapsed fuel demand during pandemic lockdowns briefly pushed refining margins toward zero or negative at several U.S. plants, some of which idled units or shut down entirely rather than keep running at a loss. Gross margin on the same 200,000 barrels a day falls from $1.3 billion a year to roughly $584 million. Operating costs stay essentially fixed. RIN costs, driven by a credit market that trades independently of how the underlying refining business is doing, can actually rise in exactly this kind of year if regulatory volumes increase. The plant that generated $530 million in operating cash flow the year before can find itself barely breaking even or losing money outright on the exact same barrels, the exact same equipment, and the exact same workforce, because the one number that actually matters, the spread, moved against it. The refiners who've survived across multiple cycles of this share a specific set of characteristics. They run complex, high-conversion facilities capable of processing cheaper, heavier crude grades that simpler competitors can't touch, capturing margin other refiners simply can't access. They own enough integrated infrastructure, blending terminals, retail networks, sometimes upstream production, to cushion the RIN exposure and price volatility that hits pure independents hardest. They defer nothing on maintenance that a corroded 46-year-old pipe elbow could eventually turn into a headline. And they treat the crack spread, not the price of crude on the evening news, as the only number that actually describes whether the business is healthy in a given month. So does owning an oil refinery actually work as a business? The honest answer depends entirely on which part of the cycle you're standing in. In the optimistic version, you own a complex, well-located, well-maintained plant in a market where a decade of closures elsewhere has left global refining capacity structurally tight, and a spread that averages $12 to $18 a barrel in a normal year can blow out to $60 in a supply crunch, turning a single quarter into one of the most profitable in the company's history, on a fixed asset that, by law and by economics, essentially cannot be replicated by a new competitor. In the realistic version, you own a plant carrying decades of aging infrastructure you didn't build and can't fully inspect without a shutdown that costs tens of millions of dollars, exposed to a regulatory credit market that can add hundreds of millions of dollars in cost with no relationship to how well the plant itself is actually running. In a business where the crack spread that decided last year's record profit can compress to nothing in a matter of months for reasons that have nothing to do with anything you did. The crude oil never really changes. What changes, sometimes overnight, sometimes in the length of time it takes one buried pipe fitting to finally fail, is whether the gap between what you paid for it and what the world will pay for what you turned it into is still there when you need it.